It's May 14th, 2015. I'm Sharon Solomon, and we're at the Fellowship of the Inner Light in Virginia Beach, and I'm telling stories about Paul and the Fellowship. So one day, we were at the ashram in Virginia Beach on 37th Street, which was the first fellowship building. When I first came to Virginia Beach, it was a little house. There was a fellowship at 37th Street, about a block away from the ocean. And this particular night, we were having people come from out of town, and the people who were coming were Judy Scutch and Gerald Jampolsky. And we were trying to get the house ready. And as happened quite often in that little house on 37th Street in Virginia Beach, the lights went off. And we did have extra fuses. It wasn't the break, we didn't have breakers, we had fuses, but nobody could get it to work. So we decided to start a fire instead. And so for about a couple of hours during the day, successive people would come into the living room where the fireplace was and try to get the fire going. And people were getting a bit frustrated because nobody could get the fire to work. Now, we were also trying to clean the house at the same time, trying to get it ready for Gerald Jampolsky. And it was getting dark, kind of really toward evening. And so I was alone in the living room. I was dusting something, and Paul walks in. And he'd been hearing the commotions about trying to get the fire going. And he walks over to the fireplace, he puts out his hand like this, and whoosh, the fire starts. And I said, Paul, how did you do that? And he just looked at me, he had this look that he would give us, this kind of mind telling. So that was kind of one of the first experiences I had of kind of miracles around the fellowship. And actually, I'd seen a lot else before, actually, too. Paul we used to have a prayer healing service, and every night there were people who conducted the prayer healing service at 9 o'clock. And after the prayer healing service, I found out later, every night, Paul would come in and work, because if he came in before the prayer healing service, we would all crowd around him and he wasn't able to work, so he'd have to come in after the prayer healing service when we had all left. But one night, when I stayed later, I won't say names, but one of the other people came in during the fellowship, and Paul and him got into an argument, and the lights went out. In the middle of the argument, they flickered, and that happened about 3 times during the early days when I was first at the fellowship. Paul and someone would get into an argument, and just as they were kind of raising their voices at each other, all the electricity in the building would go out. So I'm just going to go through different kinds of stories that I recall. Stephen Haslam was Paul's apprentice, and they had one of the goals of being Paul's student was to learn to think with the mind of the master. So he would build a connection with us. And one day we were sitting around the table, and Stephen was in California teaching a class. And Paul said, "This is Stephen's bell. When I ring this bell, it's to get Stephen." And he rings his bell, and the phone rings. And there's Stephen. Another time with Stephen, I probably should tell these stories when Stephen's there, but I don't know, because I don't remember what he remembers, because he might have a totally different recollection. But he had arrived at the airport in Washington. We were at Hearthfire. and somehow, the car was, he had the car parked in the parking lot there, but he didn't have the keys. And so there was all this communication going back with trying to get Stephen connected with the keys to the car and where they were, and Mariana, who was one of the students who was living at Hartford at the time, she was on the phone making arrangements with something about rugs or flowers or something, and she kept being on the phone. And Paul said, Mariana, get off the phone because Stephen's about to call. We need to arrange for him to get home because he doesn't have his keys. And Mariana kept talking, and Mariana kept talking, and Paul tried to, so she's still talking, the phone clicks off. and she's about to pick it up again, and the phone rings, and it's Stephen. One time, Paul and I and Michael McCarthy were at the fellowship, and we were going to the 37th Street house, and Michael and Paul decided they were going to race back. And so they left about at the same time, and Michael speeds up ahead and goes around a different street, and we get to the corner of Atlantic and Laskin Road, and the light had just turned red, and then the light just turned green. And Paul speeds ahead, and we get to the ashram first. This isn't my story. This is one of the conductors, Philip Treadwell. He tells a story before they moved to Virginia Beach. The fellowship was in Atlanta, Georgia, and Tom Johnson had heard about Paul Solomon. Tom Johnson was the owner of the Heritage Store, and he invited Paul to do classes in Virginia Beach. And Tom also published the first book, the Paul Solomon Tapes, to his credit. And Paul came to Virginia Beach with one of his students at the time, Philip Treadwell. He was the conductor of the readings. And Philip tells the story that they were riding down, from the Virginia Beach Resort Hotel, down where all the woods are, and then you come to that really steep corner where you come into the numbered streets in Virginia Beach. Well, they're riding through the woods, and Paul's talking about the readings, and they're approaching that turn, and Paul's driving, and he takes his hands off the wheel and closes his eyes and starts talking from the source. And they're approaching this curve, and Philip said, he just let him go, because if the source could come out with that incredible information, he could also drive a car. The source could also drive a car. So they went past that curve, and they came into Virginia Beach. Let's see. We were in Connecticut, and he was doing an ILC class up there, and we were staying at the home of a chiropractor there. And there were two chiropractors that he was working with at the time. And Paul's getting ready for the class, and I'm trying to remember the exact sequence, but he was getting ready, and somebody appeared to him from the astral plane. And in the meantime, the chiropractor comes in saying that his father had just fallen and hit his head and was just taken to the hospital. And Paul said that this person was following him, and he recognized this person as being the father of the chiropractor. And Paul's saying that he's trying to figure out what to do. He has to go to the class, and this man, he's left his body, and he's following Paul. So Paul's, walking around the house, and this person's following him, and he's trying to figure out how to get this guy back into his body. So he decides what he had to do. He got somebody to drive us, and we had to go to the hospital and get the guy back into his body and then come late to the class. And the guy was okay eventually. But he gained consciousness.
Was that a near-death experience?
No, he didn't die.
No, I'm saying, would he have not returned to his body?
Well, apparently, from what I understood,
I'm sorry.
it wasn't like I could ask Paul, step by step, because the only thing he shared with me was that this man was following him, and he had to do something. And from what I understood, that if he stayed out too long, he wouldn't have been able to come back to his body. So we couldn't wait till after the class to return him. He had to go to the hospital to return him. That was his priority. Okay, so this one time, Paul was giving a lecture. Oh, he had given this reading for the mother of a man the day before, and the man and his wife the next day came to one of Paul's lectures. And so he had talked to this man before, but he was giving a lecture, and he saw that the man was all gray, and he saw that that there was cancer in his leg, and that if he didn't do anything, he would die. And he was trying to decide whether to tell him what was happening and how to explain it to him, because people have been telling stories about what Paul told them, but we as his students had all asked him to give us insights into our lives and to point out our flaws. That was something we had that agreement, but this man, he was a stranger at the time, and he didn't know exactly how to explain it or whether he even should. So he decided that he would talk to the man, and the man revealed to him that yes, he knew that he had cancer in his leg, and the doctors had said that they probably would have to amputate his leg. And so Paul got him and his wife together and showed them some tantric energy-raising techniques that they could do together to draw out the cancer. And through working with him, he went back to the doctor, and the doctor told him that it was what had happened was he didn't even call it spontaneous remission. He said that maybe there was a mistake. And the man turned out to be one of the became an ILC teacher. So now that Susan's back, I'd like to talk about our Israel trip.